Welcome to my garden. I'm Teresa with Teresa Marie Art and Design, and I'm going to be talking in a little bit more detail about making grapevine wreaths. The ideal time to make a grapevine wreath that I choose to do is in the fall, and it's when I prune my grapevine while it's green, and then I make the grapevine wreath. But today is April 30th, so I don't have a vine that I just pruned. I do have some grapevine wreaths that are already made from last fall. But what I did is I took them apart just to show you the process of making a grapevine wreath. So here's one of my starter vines that I pruned last fall. If you look, you see how thick this edge is right here. What I do is I prune all my vines after they've had their season of bearing grapes and the leaves are starting to die back. And that is the grapevine time of telling me it's time to be pruned. And I prune it because I want it to have a rest time during the fall and winter, and then all the energy goes back into the roots to help the grapevine to be strong, produce good leaves for helping the vine to grow, for photosynthesis, and to put out little flowers and to get them pollinated, and then to produce really healthy grapes. So this here is a grapevine that I use. This was the starter one that I used. And what I do is I try to find the longest vine and the thickest vine. And when there's little offshoots, so like there might be a little offshoot right here, I prune that off. And if you could see, I pruned here and I pruned here. If you could see that, there were little vines coming off there. I pruned all that off, and that makes it easier for me to make the vine. So what I do is I just take the thickest end like this, and I'm going to step back so that you could see, and I twist it. It's a lot like taking like when you do macrame or any kind of weaving. It's very much like the grapevine, and I take that end and I form a circle, and I've already formed this circle right here last fall, but at one time this was a straight vine, but because it's been in this shape as a wreath, it dried this way, and so now it's circular. And what I do is I take it, and so I'm going to go back. I'm not going to talk, and I just want you to watch a little bit, and I'll come back forward. And it's a little bit like sewing too. And I'm curving this vine around. Now, because it's dry, it's a little bit harder to work. I've been trying to let it sit in the rain so it softens it up. One thing you could do when the grapevine wreath has dried, you could soak it in the bathtub for about 24 hours, and that'll make it a little bit easier to make into a shape. But for me, the ideal time is when I have a fresh pruned grapevine and the vines are still green and they don't break as easily. And then sometimes as I'm shaping it, I want to make it into a circle. So I'm pressing it against my belly like this. like this, and like that, or either I could press it up against a table. So here I have a work table that I work on in the garden on my patio. So here's my first shape, like this. And then you see these little gaps right here. This is where you want to put your other vine when you, and just you'll have several or few vines that you want to use depending on how thick you want the grapevine to be. So I have this one that I was starting to make into a really tiny vine, a grapevine right here. But what I'm going to show you, like this one, for instance, see this here? This was my starter vine. And if you look closely, it's woven. And I take the vine, the first vine, and I wrap it around like this, around itself like this. And then I'll take another one. Let me see. So that's that. So then I have another end like this one right here. And what I did is I tucked it in a hole and then I wove it around, 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 just really tight. And this is an example. See all these gaps right here? This is where I'm going to tuck in a vine right here. And I always start with the thicker end of the vine right here. And that helps to hold the vine together. Now, when you make it when it's green, or if you make it at this time of year where you've taken it and you've soaked it in the bathtub, it has moisture in it. And so what the vine wants to do, it has memory of being straight and growing out. This grapevine that I have behind me, I had it growing all over my patio underneath another arbor over here. And when you weave it around and around, then it wants to push out. And when it pushes out, that helps to keep it in place so it doesn't fall apart. Now, if you're somewhat new at making grapevine wreaths, there's always a learning curve. And what I've done when I was first new at making the grapevine wreaths, I would take a wire, and here's an example of a wire right here. And I use this wire to tie a bow onto the wreath, but I just want to show you how easy it is to bend. It's like a jewelry wire or a craft wire. It's really easy to bend. And then I've tried to use wire that's a similar color as the grapevine wreath. And or if I wanted to put greenery in there, then I'll put a green one or a brown one or a copper one. And then I wrap it around the vine and then I just twist, and that helps to hold the vine in place. And one thing I like to do with the grapevine wreaths is I like to tuck in, all these little gaps. I'll take greenery such as lavender or bay laurel or rosemary. I have a lot of evergreen trees, and I'll just snip off little branches of it, evergreen, and I'll just tuck it in there. I know that some people like to use hot glue, but I don't like to use hot glue to keep the vine together or to put all the greenery in there. because what I want to do is I want to be able to pull it out when it dies, and then I can use this grapevine wreath over and over and over again and put something seasonal in there. So another thing that you could do, I make these little fluffy bows, and then I tie it with wire, and then I put it around the grapevine wreath. And then here's another, so I just take a ribbon, and I like to take the wire ribbon because it has shape to it, like this one, and I want to shape it and curve it around. And then I wrap that around the grapevine wreath or the wisteria wreath. So this one is a wisteria wreath, for example. But I like to do that. And then, so I had this one up for Easter, and I had the bow, and I just put flowers and things and greenery in there. But then I'm just going to take this out because it's all dry. But it was pretty when I had it with fresh greenery, but it's so easy to just take it all out. And now I can use that again very easily. So, and then you could just take the ribbon off, put a Christmas ribbon, a Thanksgiving ribbon, Easter ribbon, Mother's Day ribbon, and put it on, and that way as well. So one of the things that's really important is to have a healthy grapevine and to have it growing in the right conditions. So my grapevine over here, for instance, it's facing south. It's somewhat southeast, but primarily south. So it gets full sun, and then it gets the warm sun that's reflected off of the house. And the grapevine really, really likes that. So another thing that I do is I use this fertilizer that I found. It's called Black Lake Organics in Olympia, Washington. And it has all kinds of beneficial bacteria. It has, it's hard to pronounce, but it's called mycorrhizal fungi. And mycorrhizal fungi is excellent for being in the soil, and then it helps to form on the roots, and it helps to help the grapevine and all the plants to resist disease and pests, and it helps it to be healthy and strong. So this is the bag, and I use a lot of their fertilizers that are ideal for particular plants. And I'm always learning, always trying to find out new information, new advice. So that's just pretty much all that I could think of. Another thing that I do, when I prune, I always sterilize my pruning shears every time I prune. So in between each particular plant or vine or tree, I sterilize, I wipe it down because I don't want to be spreading disease from one plant to another plant. And another thing I do is when I prune, sometimes, especially with the grapevine, it'll spring back when you're pruning. And I try to wear goggles. So I have some really good goggles. I wear those. I made the mistake one time where I was pruning my trees behind me, and there were other vines underneath, and the Pacific Shore pine, it sprung back, and I wasn't wearing glasses, I wasn't wearing goggles, and the needles brushed against the white of my eye, and I had to go to the ophthalmologist and get all this medication and drops, and it was very, very painful. So I encourage you to wear a really good pair of goggles when you're pruning, fertilize, find the right location, a sunny location for the vine, train the vine, have it where it can grow and prune the vine at the right time, which is the fall. So I want to show you a close-up of my grapevine. So right now it is beginning to bud. And this is from last year, last fall from pruning right here. And then see this little tendril right here? Sometimes I like to leave these little tendrils on when I'm making my grapevine wreath, but sometimes they get in the way. And then over here, you can see this. This says new growth right here, but I pruned the vine right here to help make my grapevine wreath. But sometimes you might have these little offshoots of vine and they get in the way when you're making your grapevine. So that's something to consider. And I will talk to you soon, and I will definitely show you about pruning this fall of a grapevine and show you about making a grapevine wreath when it's freshly pruned and when it's still green. So I look forward to seeing you next time, and thank you for joining me.